Max Verstappen just got out of the RB22 in Australia, and what he said doesn't match the data, doesn't match the results, and definitely doesn't match a car that was nearly 1 full second off the pace. Because while the numbers say Red Bull is struggling, Verstappen is talking like he's already found something. Something inside that car that nobody else has seen yet. We're talking about a driver who can feel the smallest change in balance, the tiniest shift in energy, suddenly sounding calm, confident, almost certain, right after one of the worst starts Red Bull has had in years. That doesn't happen unless something big changed. And if what Verstappen felt is real, then Australia wasn't a warning sign. It was the first clue. At the beginning of the season, nothing about Red Bull made sense. This wasn't a small drop in performance. This was a collapse, at least on the surface. A team that dominated the previous era suddenly fighting just to stay relevant. A car that looked fast in flashes, but completely unstable when pushed. And the numbers didn't lie. Almost 1 full second per lap off the leaders in certain conditions. Not in one sector, across the entire lap. That's not a setup issue. That's something deeper. Something structural. But here's where the story starts to shift. Because if you looked closely at those early sessions in Australia, there were moments. Small ones. Easy to miss. Corners where the RB22 suddenly looked alive. Short bursts where the car rotated perfectly, accelerated cleanly, and gave Verstappen exactly what he needed. Then, it disappeared again. Back to instability. Back to unpredictability. And that contrast is everything. Because it tells you the performance was always there. Just not accessible. Now think about what that means. Red Bull didn't build a slow car. They built a car they couldn't control. Too much energy coming in. Too much variation in how that energy was deployed. A system that felt different every single lap. And for any driver, that's a problem. But for Verstappen, it's something else entirely. Because he doesn't just react to the car. He studies it. He feels patterns most drivers don't even notice. So when he steps out after that first day, and sounds calm, it's not because the car is easy. It's because he's already starting to understand it. And that's the first warning sign for everyone else. Because once Verstappen understands something, he starts extracting performance others can't find. Now connect that to what happened immediately after Australia. The rule changes. Less energy per lap. More controlled deployment. Shorter, more predictable cycles. At first glance, it looks like a general reset. But if you look deeper, it targets exactly what was hurting Red Bull the most. Too much uncontrolled energy. Too much chaos in the system. And suddenly, that chaos is reduced. Not eliminated. But reduced enough to make the car more readable. More predictable. More usable. And this is where everything begins to align. Because Red Bull didn't just wait for the rules to help them. They brought updates. Subtle ones. Focused ones. Not on raw speed, but on how the car behaves under load. How it transitions between phases. How it connects energy, aerodynamics, and mechanical grip. And now, Verstappen gets back in the car, with those changes in place. And instead of fighting it, he starts flowing with it. That's the difference. And it's a dangerous one. Because the gap between Red Bull and the leaders wasn't just about performance. It was about access to performance. And if that access is now improving, then that 1 second gap isn't real anymore. It's temporary. But here's the tension. Because understanding the car is one thing. Executing under pressure is something else. And Miami will not be forgiving. A sprint weekend. Limited practice. High temperatures. Constant changes in grip. This is not the environment where you slowly build confidence. This is where everything is tested instantly. So now the question isn't whether Red Bull found performance. It's whether they can control it when it matters. Because if Verstappen's calm reaction in Australia means what it looks like, then that first day wasn't a struggle. It was the moment he realized the car wasn't broken. It was just waiting to be understood. But here's where everything starts to tighten, because understanding the car doesn't mean controlling the race. And Miami is where that difference becomes brutal. Because this track doesn't give you time to think. It forces decisions. Fast ones. Every corner leads into another, every mistake carries forward, and every hesitation costs more than it should. And for Red Bull, that's the real test. Not whether the RB22 has performance, but whether that performance can survive pressure. Because now, the car is no longer completely unpredictable. It's partially understood. And that creates a very specific kind of danger. Because a car that is slightly unstable, but mostly controllable, becomes aggressive, responsive, sharp. And in the hands of Verstappen, that's where things start to change. Because he doesn't need perfection. He never has. Give him a car that responds just enough, and he will find time others don't even see. Now imagine that across a full lap in Miami. Multiple traction zones. Short straights. Constant acceleration phases. This isn't a circuit where one big weakness ruins everything. It's a circuit where small strengths repeat over and over again. And suddenly, those small moments Red Bull showed in Australia start connecting. One clean exit becomes two. Two becomes a full sector. A full sector becomes a lap. And that's when the gap begins to disappear. But here's where the pressure builds again. Because Miami isn't just about finding rhythm. It's about keeping it. Heat, humidity, tire degradation, everything works against consistency. And the new rules make energy deployment even more sensitive under these conditions. Too aggressive, you lose traction. Too cautious, you lose time. And this is where Red Bull's old weakness still lingers. Because even with improvements, their system is still more aggressive than others. Still more extreme. Still closer to the limit. Which means one thing: higher risk. But also, higher reward. Because if they manage to keep that system stable, even for a few laps, they don't just match the leaders. They attack them. And that's where Verstappen becomes the difference. Because while other drivers are adapting to the new balance, he's already driving at that edge. Comfortable with instability. Able to extract performance from a car that doesn't feel perfect. So now, give him a car that is closer to stable than before. And something very dangerous starts to appear. Confidence under pressure. And confidence changes everything. Because once a driver feels in control, they stop reacting. They start dictating. Now imagine the race reaching its most critical phase. Tires fading. Energy limited. Everyone trying to manage what's left. This is where Red Bull used to struggle the most. Where the car became unpredictable again. Where performance dropped. But now, this is exactly where Verstappen hinted something different. Because if what he felt in Australia carries into Miami, then instead of losing control in those moments, he keeps it. And that's the shift. From surviving the race to shaping it. And if that happens, then all those early struggles, all that instability, all that 1 second gap, they weren't the problem. They were the process. The phase before everything clicks. So now everything leads to one final tension. Not whether Red Bull improved, but how much. Because if the connection Verstappen started to feel in Australia is real, then Miami won't be about catching up. It will be about revealing how close they already are. And the most dangerous part? No one will see it coming until it's already happening. And this is where everything finally comes together, because now it's no longer about what Red Bull fixed. It's about what everyone else missed. Because while the spotlight has been on Mercedes losing their advantage and Ferrari rising with the new rules, Red Bull has been rebuilding something far more dangerous. Not a perfect car, a usable one. And that distinction changes everything. Because a perfect car gives you speed. A usable car, in the hands of Verstappen, gives you control. Now think about how this race will unfold. The first laps will be chaotic. Cars close together, energy systems not fully synchronized, drivers still adapting to how the new rules actually feel on track. That's where most teams will hesitate. They'll protect tires. They'll avoid risks. They'll wait. But Verstappen? That's where he reads the race. Not reacting, anticipating. Because when you've driven a car that was unstable, unpredictable, almost impossible to trust, and suddenly it becomes just stable enough, you don't hesitate. You attack. And that's the moment where everything shifts. Because Red Bull doesn't need to dominate from the start. They just need one window. One sequence where the car behaves exactly the way Verstappen expects. One lap where energy deployment, grip, and balance align perfectly. And when that happens, he goes for it. Not gradually. Not cautiously. Decisively. And this is what makes this so difficult for the others. Because Mercedes will try to control. Ferrari will try to maintain rhythm. But Red Bull will disrupt. They don't follow the race. They break it. Now imagine the final phase. The moment where races are actually decided. Tires at the limit. Energy almost gone. Drivers making small mistakes. This is where systems usually fail. Where consistency drops. Where control disappears. But if what Verstappen felt in Australia was real, this is where Red Bull becomes strongest. Because they've already lived in that instability. They've already learned how to operate on the edge. So when everyone else starts losing control, they're still there. Still pushing. Still extracting performance. And that's when the race flips. Not with a dramatic move. Not with a sudden gap. But with something much harder to defend against. Relentless pressure. Lap after lap. Corner after corner. Until the driver ahead breaks. Now everything connects. The early struggles. The 1 second deficit. The chaotic energy system. The calm reaction from Verstappen. It all leads to this final realization. Red Bull didn't need to start fast. They needed to understand their problem before anyone else understood theirs. And now, they might have. So when Miami reaches its most critical moment, watch closely. Not for who is leading, but for who is waiting. Because if Red Bull has truly solved what was holding them back, they won't show it early. They'll save it for the exact moment where no one can respond. And that's when you'll see the truth. What Verstappen revealed after that first day in Australia wasn't confidence. It was a warning.